I've been hiking and backpacking for about 10 years now. I've seen some weird stuff, weird tracks, abandoned campsites that looked like they were left in a hurry, but nothing ever made me want to quit the hobby entirely. That changed last November. It was the very beginning of winter. The snow hadn't started falling heavily yet, but the temperature had dropped significantly, and the ground was locked up in a hard, frozen state where every step you took crunches loudly. My buddy Dennis and I decided to do a weekend trip in a state forest about 3 hours north of where we live. We wanted to get one last trip in before the weather got too brutal to enjoy it. We parked the car at the trailhead around 10:00 a.m. The plan was to hike off trail. We wanted total isolation. We didn't want to see dayhickers or families. We just wanted to get deep into the woods, camp, and freeze our butts off for a night or two. We hiked for most of the day. The woods were a mix of gray and brown, with the trees mostly bare, except for a few stubborn oaks. It was that kind of dead silence you only get in winter. No bugs, no birds, just the wind cutting through the branches. Around 400 p.m., the sun was already starting to dip low, casting those long, creepy shadows. So we decided to start looking for a spot. We found a perfect location right next to a creek. The water was icy clear, rushing over smooth gray stones. There was a flat clearing about 10 ft from the water's edge, surrounded by a dense thicket of pines on 3 sides. It felt secure. I want to be very clear about this part. We spent a lot of time setting up. We cleared the ground of rocks and sticks. We walked around the perimeter to find firewood. We were all over that clearing. There was absolutely nothing there, just dirt, dead pine needles, and rocks. We set up the tent with the door facing the creek so we could listen to the water while we fell asleep. It was a small 2-person tent, tight quarters, but warmer that way. By the time we got the fire going, it was pitch black. We cooked some freeze, dried beef stroganoff, which actually tastes decent when you're starving and cold, and sat on a log we had dragged over near the fire pit. We stayed up until maybe 10:30 p.m. just talking. You know, regular stuff, work, relationships, video games. It was a good time. The fire was dying down to coals, and the cold was starting to creep into our heavy coats. "I'm tapping out," Dennis said, standing up and stretching. "It's freezing." "Yeah, I'll be in a second," I said. "Going to make sure this fire is totally out." Dennis crawled into the tent. I stayed out for another 15 minutes, dousing the embers with water from the creek and kicking dirt over them. I scanned the area with my headlamp one last time before going in. The beam cut through the darkness, hitting the trees in the creek. Nothing, just the woods. I crawled into the sleeping bag. I was the last one asleep. I know this for a fact because Dennis was already snoring lightly by the time I zipped myself in. It took me a while to drift off because the ground was hard, but eventually the sound of the creek knocked me out. I slept pretty heavily, which is rare for me while camping. Usually, twig snap wakes me up, but that night I didn't hear a thing. No footsteps, no animals, nothing. I woke up around 6:30 a.m. It was that gray early morning light where you can see, but everything looks washed out and dull. The air inside the tent was frigid, and I could see my breath puffing out in front of me. I really had to use the bathroom, so I tried to unzip the sleeping bag as quietly as I could to not wake Dennis. I sat up, put my boots on, and unzipped the tent door. The zipper made that loud sound that seems to echo for miles in the quiet woods. I pushed the flap open and looked out. My heart didn't just drop. It completely stopped. Sitting on a large flat rock directly in front of our tent, maybe 4 ft away from the door, was a teddy bear. It wasn't a new toy. It was a dirty blue stuffed bear. It looked like one of those old Care Bears from the 80s, but the symbol on the stomach was worn off and covered in grime. It was wet, matted, and one of its plastic eyes was scratched up. But the worst part was how it was positioned. It wasn't lying on its side as someone had dropped it. It was sitting perfectly upright. Its legs were sticking out. Its arms were at its sides, and its head was turned slightly so it was facing the door of our tent. I froze. I literally couldn't move. My brain was trying to process how it got there. I had walked past that rock a dozen times yesterday. I had sat near it. It wasn't there. I backed into the tent slowly, my breathing getting really shallow and fast. I reached over and shook Dennis hard. "Dennis, wake up now," he groaned. What time is it?" "Just get up and look outside," I said. Dennis sat up, rubbing his eyes, annoyed. He leaned forward and looked out the open door. I watched his face go from sleepy irritation to total confusion, and then to pure fear. "What is that?" he hissed. "Did you put that there?" He looked at me, his eyes wide. "No, man. I just woke up." I opened the door, and it was there. Dennis looked back at the bear, then scanned the tree line. "Is someone out there?" We both sat there in silence for a solid minute, just listening. The only sound was the creak. It was maddening. If there was a twig snap or a laugh or anything, at least we would know where they were. But there was nothing. "We need to go," Dennis said, "right now." I grabbed my knife from my pack, and we both crawled out of the tent. I expected someone to jump out from behind a tree screaming, but nobody did. We walked up to the bear, up close. It was even nastier. It smelled like mildew and old dirt. It was soaked through, presumably from the morning frost, or maybe it had been in the creek, but it was sitting on a dry patch of the rock. "Look at the ground," I said. The ground around the rock was frozen hard. There were layers of dead leaves and pine needles. We looked for footprints, bootprints, anything. But because the ground was so hard and covered in debris, we couldn't see any distinct tracks. "Someone had to place this here," Dennis said, his voice trembling. "They had to walk right up to the tent while we were sleeping." That was the thought that made me feel sick. The tent material is thin. Someone had been standing inches away from our heads while we slept. They stood there in the dark and set this toy up to watch us. They didn't steal our gear. They didn't attack us. They just left a message: "Forget breakfast." I said, "Pack it up." We tore that camp down in record time. Usually it takes us 20 minutes to pack up properly. We shoved everything into our bags in 5. We didn't even bother rolling the tent neatly. We just stuffed it in. The whole time we were packing, I kept looking at the tree line. The woods felt different now. Yesterday they felt empty. Now they felt crowded. I kept feeling like I could see movement in my peripheral vision, but every time I turned, it was just a swaying branch. We left the blue bear on the rock. Neither of us wanted to touch it. The hike back to the car was a nightmare. We practically ran. We kept looking over our shoulders every 50 yards. Every time the wind blew some dry leaves across the ground, we both jumped. We didn't talk. We just moved. We cut the trip 2 days short. We were supposed to stay until Sunday, but we were back at the car by noon on Friday. When we finally got in the car and locked the doors, the relief was overwhelming. But then the question started. I know Dennis didn't do it. He was asleep before me and I was up before him. Plus, I've known the guy for years. He's not an actor. He was genuinely terrified, and I know I didn't do it. That leaves the only other option. Someone was watching us. They probably watched us hike in. And then at some point in the middle of the night in the freezing cold, they walked into our campsite. They stood over us while we were unconscious. They placed that dirty little bear on the rock, specifically positioning it to face the door so it would be the first thing we saw. And then they backed away and probably watched us wake up from the tree line. We never heard anything weird that night. No footsteps, no heavy breathing, just silence. I haven't gone backpacking since. I still go for day hikes on popular trails where there are lots of people, but I don't think I can ever sleep in a tent in the deep woods again. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. I work at a distribution center about 40 minutes from my house. It's grueling work, mostly lifting heavy boxes and driving forklifts, and my shift ends at 2:00 a.m. If you've ever driven home at that hour in the middle of February, you know how lonely the roads get. It feels like you're the only person left on Earth. This happened 3 years ago during a particularly bad winter. The snow had been falling since noon, and by the time I clocked out, the roads were a mess. My car, a beat-up 2008 Honda Civic, wasn't exactly built for blizzard conditions, so I had to take it slow. Usually, I take the interstate, but the radio said there was a jackknife semi blocking 2 lanes about 5 mi up. I was exhausted, my back ached, and I just wanted to get into my bed. So I made the decision to take the back roads. It cut through miles of farmland and heavy woods. In the summer, it's a nice drive. In the winter at 2:30 a.m., it's a black void. I was maybe 20 minutes into the drive. The heater was blasting, but I was still shivering. The snow was blowing horizontally across the windshield, making it hard to see anything beyond the reach of my high beams. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards ahead on the right shoulder, there was a lump in the snowbank. As I got closer, the shape became clear. It was a person. It looked like a man wearing a dark flannel jacket, lying face down, half buried in the plow drift. My stomach dropped. My immediate thought was that someone had slid off the road, crashed their car into the ditch, and tried to walk for help before collapsing. I slowed down. I didn't see a wrecked car anywhere, but the ditch was deep, so it could have been hidden. I pulled my car over to the left side of the road, keeping a bit of distance, and rolled down my window. "Hey!" I yelled out. The wind snatched my voice away immediately. The body didn't move. Now, I've heard all the warnings about not stopping for strangers, but when you see a guy lying in the snow and freezing temperatures, your human instinct kicks in. You don't want someone to freeze to death while you just drive by. I put the car in park, but left the engine running. I turned on my hazard lights. I grabbed my phone, intending to dial 911, but I had 0 bars of service. Of course, I grabbed a heavy flashlight I keep in the glove box and stepped out. The cold hit me like a physical punch. The wind was howling. "Hey, can you hear me?" I shouted again, walking slowly across the icy asphalt toward him. I was about 10 ft away when the body suddenly moved. He didn't groan or struggle to rise, as an injured person would. He sat up violently, snapping his torso straight up. He turned his head to look at me. He was young, maybe mid-20s. He wasn't wearing gloves. He wasn't shivering. His face wasn't pale or blue from the cold. It was flushed, alive. "Help!" he screamed. "My leg, I think it's broken." I stopped walking immediately. Something was wrong. The way he yelled, it wasn't panicked. It sounded rehearsed. It was too loud, too projected. In his eyes, he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at my flashlight. His eyes were locked on my car behind me. Specifically, he was looking at the driver's side door I had left open. "Where's your car?" I asked, taking a step back. "Did you crash? It's in the woods," he yelled, pointing vaguely into the darkness behind him without looking. "Come help me up. I can't walk." He started shifting his legs. He was moving them fine. He was digging his heels into the snow, tensing his muscles like a runner getting ready to launch off the blocks. He wasn't injured. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't the cold. It was that primal alarm bell telling me I was the prey. I took another step back toward my car. "I'm going to drive up the road to get a signal and call an ambulance," I said. The guy's face changed instantly. The victim's mask dropped. He looked angry. "Just come here and help me," he shouted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming aggressive. Then I saw it. Behind him, past the snowbank, deep in the treine, the beam of my headlights caught the reflection of something. Not eyes, metal, maybe a belt buckle, maybe a zipper. 2 shadows detached themselves from the trees. They stood up tall. They had been crouching in the brush, waiting. They were dressed in all black with hoods pulled up. "Run!" The guy in the snowbank screamed. He didn't scream it at me. He screamed it to them. The guy in the snowbank scrambled to his feet. No broken leg, perfectly agile, and lunged at me. The 2 figures from the trees sprinted onto the road, cutting across the ice to flank me. I didn't think. I spun around and bolted. My boots slipped on the black ice, and I almost went down face first. I scrambled, hands hitting the freezing pavement to catch myself, and pushed off. I could hear their boots crunching on the snow behind me. Heavy, fast footsteps. They weren't yelling anymore. They were silent. That was almost scarier. They were just hunting. I was only 15 FT from my car, but it felt like a mile. I could hear the guy from the snowbank getting closer. I could hear his breathing. I threw myself at the open driver's side door. I grabbed the frame and swung my body inside. As I grabbed the handle to slam the door shut, a hand slammed onto the glass. The guy from the snowbank was right there. He grabbed the top of the door frame, trying to rip the door back open. I pulled with everything I had. I saw his face through the gap. He was grinning, a manic, adrenaline-fueled grin. I slammed the door shut, catching his fingers for a split second before he yanked them back. I hit the lock button immediately. The other two guys had reached the car. One of them kicked the rear passenger door. The other one was trying to smash the passenger window with something heavy, maybe a tire iron or a rock. I stomped on the gas pedal. The wheels spun for one terrifying second. The car didn't move. The tires just winded against the ice. The traction control light flashing on my dashboard. The guy on my side started punching the glass, screaming obscenities now. Then the tires caught a patch of dry pavement. The car lurched forward, fishtailing violently to the left. I almost side-swiped the guy on the driver's side. I saw him jump back into the snowbank to avoid getting crushed. I corrected the wheel and floored it. I didn't look in the rear-view mirror until I was a mile down the road. When I finally did, there was nothing but darkness and swirling snow. I didn't stop until I reached the state police barracks, which was another 20 minutes away. I ran inside, probably looking like a lunatic, shaking and out of breath. I told the officer everything. They sent a patrol car out to the spot immediately. They didn't catch them. By the time the cops got there, the guys were gone. But the officer told me later what they found. They found footprints in the snow, 3 distinct sets. And they found something else. Hidden behind the tree-line, right where the 2 other guys had been hiding, they found a pile of large rocks and a coil of heavy rope. The cop was blunt with me. He said they weren't just trying to carjack me. If they just wanted the car, they would have pulled me out and driven off. The rope implied they wanted to take me with them, or tie me up and leave me in the woods to freeze while they used my car for whatever else they had planned. I don't take back roads anymore. I don't care if there's traffic. I don't care if the highway is closed. If I see someone lying in the snow, I call 911 and I keep driving. It sounds cold, I know, but I saw the look on that guy's face when I hesitated. He wasn't looking for help. He was looking for a victim. This story took place in late 2020 in the months of the CO-19 lockdown in the UK. It occurred in the town of Ayr, Scotland. On this cold, frosty evening, my friend Nam, who was 30, was getting ready to go to work at a hospital in the area for the evening shift. During this time, road closures meant the hospital could only be accessed from her house via a quieter back road. Her neighbor had begun renting the house next door to NM the year before. She didn't really know anything about the neighbor. However, recently, for the last week or so, it seemed as though he had a house guest staying in his house. NM had noticed this house guest, who was a man in his 50s, would stare at her in an inappropriate manner when she would be leaving or entering her house. He made her feel uneasy, and she always felt anxious when she knew he was outside. On this occasion, while she exited the house, he was standing out front at the house, and for the first time actually spoke directly to her in a gruff accent, and what he said made her skin crawl. "Hey, Miss Amjad, my name is Alec. I just want to say you look amazing in those leather trousers you're wearing. Nam wore these because she felt they kept her warm in the frosty weather. She is originally from the Isle of Lewis, so she knew how to combat cold weather." The fact that he said this and the way he delivered this was inappropriate beyond words, and when she glanced at him, She told me he was looking her up and down like she was a piece of meat. She didn't respond as she was in shock that this was the first time he had spoken to her, and this is what he said. How the heck can this be the first thing you ever say to someone? She thought. She jumped into her car and Nam almost dropped her glasses off her face as she was so shaken. She felt as though she was going to throw up as he was still glaring at her with a blank expression. And she said it was as though he was incapable of blinking. This felt as though it lasted forever. And it got even worse when she realized she had to defrost the car windscreen and windows. Her husband was also working, so she had nobody in her house she could turn to or make her feel safe. She then came to an even worse realization. She didn't have her phone. She sat in the car debating with herself whether to get it or leave it, as she would need it later in the night at the hospital. She decided she would quickly run in and get it. Nam jumped quickly out of the car and ran inside, and she realized Alec was not standing there anymore. This filled her with relief, as it meant she wouldn't have to hear another inappropriate comment or see another inappropriate look from him. She unlocked the house and went inside. She was in there for 30 seconds, picked up her keys, and went to leave again until she heard a noise near the front door. The house was fairly dark, so this filled her with dread. It didn't seem as though anything was there, so she put this down to nerves after her incident with Alec. Nam locked up the house and got back in her car. She then began her drive to the hospital. As mentioned, this was out in a quiet area due to road closures, so there were not many cars around and people weren't out as much due to the pandemic. After driving for about 2 minutes out of the residential area, she realized her car had started struggling. She stopped the car, got out, and realized her back left tire was flat. But to her horror, it wasn't just flat, it had been slashed. She had her mobile phone in her hand. A car then, seemingly from out of nowhere, then came up behind her with its lights on full beam. Nam was practically blinded by this, and she had to turn away from the lights. After a few seconds, she heard the other car's door slam, and all of a sudden, a strong gloved hand clamped tightly over her mouth. Nam said tears began to fill her eyes behind her glasses. The panicked breath coming from her nose was visible in the evening frost. Her lips began to quiver behind the gloved hand, but she was too shocked to even attempt to scream or bite the hand. What happened next was the most terrifying moment of her life. She heard a familiar voice say, "Right, Miss Amjad, hands behind the back." It was Alec. She was so confused, but in her state of shock and fear, Nam put her hands behind her back, and the gloved hand was removed from her mouth, but was replaced with some sort of rag. Nam then heard the familiar sound of parcel tape being pulled, and her hands were taped up behind her back. Alex then turned NM around to face him. She was backed up against the boot of her car. Her eyes were filled with tears as she was forced to look into his eyes. He took the rag out of her mouth and then put a long strip of parcel tape across Nam's mouth. Nam began mumbling and pleading against the tape that was gagging her. Alec then leaned down and taped her feet together. As the brown parcel tape was covering Nam's mouth, the breath from her nose looked like steam from a kettle on this now freezing night. Alec walked round to the front of her car and switched the engine off. While he walked to the end of the car, Nam noticed he hadn't taped her feet together as securely as her hands and mouth were. So, she managed to kick her legs hard enough to break free. As Alec returned to the back of the car, not knowing Nam had freed her legs, he was stunned when a swift kick from NM, as well as a loud mumbled grunt, connected with his groin area. He screamed and bent over, and then NM kicked him as hard as she could in his face, knocking him completely to the ground. NM was in shock over what had occurred in the past few minutes. The night was now quiet and still. With her hands bound behind her back, Nam walked around from the back of the car to the front. Her leather trousers, the creep, made reference to her making a swooshing noise in the cool air. She caught a glimpse of herself in the side mirror, her long dark hair blowing in the air, her glasses beginning to steam, her sealed lips visible through the strip of brown shiny tape. and the steam of her breath coming from her nose as she loudly exhaled. She then went back to the rear of the car. Nam then rubbed the tape from her mouth against her shoulder until it peeled off. She then leaned against her car boot and managed to step backwards, so her taped hands were now in front of her, and she chewed at the parcel tape until they were free. NM took a few seconds now that her mouth was free from the tape to catch her breath back properly. She then grabbed her phone, which had fallen to the ground when Alec had grabbed her. She phoned the police and then her colleague at the hospital. Alec was arrested and taken away. He was charged and found guilty of attempted kidnapping and physical assault. It also emerged that Alec was staying in the neighbor's house without his knowledge. Nam's neighbor had been staying with family because of the pandemic. So Alec had actually been illegally staying there. As you'd probably guess, Alec wasn't his real name. He knew Nam's name because he'd been looking at her deliveries while they were sitting outside. NM began taking kickboxing lessons a few months before this incident, and she believes this may be what saved her. She has moved on from this traumatic experience with a lot of counseling and therapy. Nam is very resilient, and she along with her husband has recovered from this ordeal, and they are grateful that Nam is safe and well.